The book really unpacks the origins of the way that we think and talk, and in some instances respond to African American criminality. It looks at the earliest moment where statistics became a kind of universal language to talk about crime among African Americans in what people then figured was an objective way, a way that was race neutral, that it was not embedded in the earlier debates that were either pro-slavery or anti-slavery. So this new statistical language emerged out of the 1890 census. It was the first census to record African Americans who had been born free of slavery's grip. 25 years old for someone born in 1865 when that 1890 census was recorded. And it discovered that 30% of the nation's prisoners were black, and black people only made up 12% of the population. And so in that one instance, that overrepresentation of African Americans in prison really led to an explosion of new interest in this data point. And it, in a sense, brought together people who had once been formally ideologically opposed to the notion that black people were sort of naturally inferior, naturally inclined to offending, had natural proclivities to stealing and breaking the law. And so now all of a sudden liberals and conservatives, blacks and whites, northerners and southerners see this data point and say, well, my gosh, maybe African Americans are inclined to criminality, and what are we going to do about it? Du Bois is basically setting a blueprint in 1899 for a very thoughtful, progressive understanding of black criminality in a real sense, not in just in a perceptual one, as a consequence of urban inequality, of industrialization. And nobody pays him any attention because their belief is that black people who are criminal are reflecting either their cultural inferiority or their racial inferiority. And so there's no reason to deploy sociological resources. There's no reason to actually study this because we know that these people are inferior, and so we're not going to waste our time spending research dollars on it. And so Du Bois's magisterial work, Philadelphia Negro, is really the last major work by a black author until the 1920s. The people who tended to focus on it between Du Bois in 1899 and the 1920s are white liberal scholars, and most of what they're doing are sort of repackaging this cultural inferiority argument. And by and large, the entire edifice of sociology is deploying its resources against eugenics and social Darwinism to say that immigrants are not infecting American society with their degenerate blood, right? That the Italians are not ruining our racial stock. They're providing real energy and effort to our labor pool. They're helping us build America, and that some of them should fall into a life of crime is more our fault than theirs. Because we haven't given them a fair opportunity, and that we stigmatize them, and our nativist proclivities make it very difficult for immigrants to live the lives that they came here to pursue. And basically, they never put black people into that equation. They left black people out of that kind of very structuralist environmental critique of the origins of white European or white ethnic criminality. And so those were the ones who ultimately gave birth, or I should say they are the academic ancestors of people in the 1950s and 60s, many of whom were also liberal scholars, who all of a sudden said, well, now we've got to figure out why is there such violence and anti-police sentiment and crimes of poverty happening in these black communities when we've just passed all this civil rights legislation, and black people should be celebrating their newfound equality and opportunity. And so that's why the book puts in conversation these sort of origins moments in the early crafting of how do you take people who are stigmatized for their race, in this case European immigrants, and transform them into working class white Americans who deserve opportunity, and that their crime becomes evidence or a symptom of their inequality, symptom of how they've been victimized by an economic arrangement that isn't fair, as opposed to, for the African American migrants of that generation, their crime becomes a symptom of their inferiority and unpreparedness to participate in a civilized, urban, sophisticated society.